once we move into the panel. But I'm now going to give the floor to Dr. Anne Eleschik from SDSN Germany. She will be presenting on a solution called Dialogue of the Scientific Advisory Councils. Anne, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Maria. Yes, I want to present a solution that is called the Dialogue of the Scientific Councils, or between the scientific councils. First of all, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present that solution here today. I present on behalf of SDSN Germany and the Science Platform Sustainability 2030. Those are also the two initiators of this dialogue, of this solution. Next slide. I want to give you an impression of our problem background. So for every solution, there is before an analysis of what could be the added value of the solution or what is the problem. So this is a depiction of the implementation architecture and development architecture of the German National Sustainable Development Strategy. And there you see, when you look at the upper part of that depiction, there is the Federal Chancellery. And the national strategy is institutionally anchored at the Federal Chancellery. Then in the middle, you see the different ministries are depicted. And what does this mean? It means that while this is anchored at the Federal Chancellery, all ministries are supposed to work on that strategy and implement that strategy. So this is like a mixture between a top-down and a bottom-up approach that we follow with the strategy. And then below the ministries, you see a depiction of the scientific councils. So this is a bit roughly. In actual, like, the landscape is structured in a way that to each ministry there belongs a scientific council at minimum, or sometimes more. Next slide. This gives what Vera, so it seems pretty well organized, but there are still challenges in this architecture. One is that there is a large number of diverse and scientific and advisory councils and also commissions. So when we talk about scientific advisory councils, those are long-term institutional structures, but we also have many different commissions that give policy advice for thematic priorities, for instance, innovation and technology, strategy, etc. pp. So there is little, what are the problems? There's little to no regular exchange among those scientific institutions or advisory institutions and across those policy fields. And second, there is little to no explicit link made in their work to sustainable development, or even better, or this was our motivation behind the solution, to the national strategy for sustainable development. And then there is a general observation that there is a lack of reciprocity and feedback in this advisory relationship between the councils and the ministries. And this was also one of the motivations to launch this dialogue. Next slide. So to this problem, or to those problem areas, we came up with, we initiated the dialogue back in 2018 for the first time, and we invited, after mapping the landscape of scientific advisory councils in Germany, we invited 10 selected councils to this dialogue. And we had the idea, I mentioned it before briefly, to bring together for the first time those advisory councils and facilitate exchange across policy fields and across those councils. And then to help them or present more impulses related to the National Sustainable Development Strategy. So for them to facilitate dialogue, how can they link their own work to this national strategy, where are thematic links and where are also institutional links. Then next slide. So this was basically the idea behind it. I tried to visualize this, and so it shows that there is a huge diversity among the scientific councils. So this is a depiction of the attendance of the last dialogue that was held in September. And there you see that there are different thematic links. For instance, the Council of Economic Experts, as well as the one for environmental policy or agriculture policy, etc., PP, and also the digital council. So newer and also long-established scientific councils were attending this dialogue. Next slide. So the goal to build an, how do you say, an advisory circle around the national development strategy, but also around SDGs more broadly. That was the idea behind our idea behind the solution. And how was this received by the attendants? I wanted to present 3 quotes that were actually underlying that we were quite successful with launching this dialogue format. And one is that one attendee said, progress on sustainable development requires exchange and collaboration across policy fields. So this was very well perceived. And another attendee, for instance, I remember said that this was the first time that he met with one of the councils where there were actually thematic links also to sustainable development. Then there was the impulse given that by means of own individual reports, one can build thematic links to the Sustainable Development Agenda and also to the SDGs more broadly. And third, that there was the idea mentioned and voiced during dialogue that joint positioning can strengthen own policy advice and the products that they were given to the ministries. Next slide. So beside those more intangible results, so well received, high interest on behalf of the ministries as well as on behalf of the scientific councils. This is illustrated by the representation of in total 20 councils during the last for the last dialogue, and 10 ministries participated. But we also had tangible results, so increased awareness of sustainable development across policy fields, and also SD relation made in their own products. So for instance, the Council for Agricultural Policy released a report this year, and it was framed and explicitly referenced to SDGs and to also the National Sustainable Development Strategy in Germany. Then there were also initiatives by participants or on their initiative. We launched another series. To give an example, this year the first part of that dialogue series was held, and that was working on the relationship between health and sustainable development. So those communities were quite separated, and this dialogue brought them together, and also with health practitioners. And another tangible result, and for us very important, is that the dialogue was, together with the initiators of the dialogue, recognized as an integral part of the sustainable development implementation architecture that was just shown in one of the first slides. Next slide. So we were also asked to talk a bit about the potential for transferability and scalability of the solution presented, and first on the issue of transferability. So we know that scientific council advisory bodies exist also in other countries and at regional bodies, so not only in Germany. And so there is a potential to replicate that kind of dialogue also in other contexts. Then we thought with this idea for the dialogue that horizontal links are also weak in other contexts. So this working in silos that we depicted in one of the first slides is also quite common to other contexts. Then the dialogue basically doesn't need much financial resources, but it needs a lot of networking and a lot of also motivating scientific councils and the representatives of them to engage with the agenda and also to engage them with the national development strategy. Then scalability, as you might have recognized from the slides before, we are so far at that early stage of the dialogue or developing the dialogue, we are much more concerned with horizontal links or establishing and strengthening horizontal links across the councils and across policy fields. But in terms of scalability, we look also already at strengthening links to chief science advisor institution structures in other countries and contexts, and to more long-standing foresight processes. And most importantly, right at the moment, also to the EU presidency, is collaboration and scaling at EU level, also with scientific advisory bodies and processes at the EU level. Yeah, thank you very much. Looking forward to the Q&A session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm going to ask all of our speakers to turn